The air was thick with tension before Jasmine Crockett even spoke, but no one expected her next sentence to land like a lightning strike. Leaning forward, eyes locked on Karoline Leavitt, she said in a measured but razor-sharp tone, "If we're talking about transparency, Karoline, maybe we should start with the truth about your marriage." The audience collectively gasped. A few muffled, "oh" reactions rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in on Leavitt's face, a flash of shock, then a tightening jaw. This wasn't just a political sparring match anymore. This was personal. What came next wasn't some vague insinuation. Crockett came armed with dates, public records, and eyewitness accounts, revealing a side of Leavitt's life that had been carefully curated for public image. In that instant, the stakes skyrocketed. The conversation shifted from policy talking points to credibility, trust, and the image Leavitt had worked so hard to protect. By the time Crockett finished her opening salvo, you could feel the shift in the room. Allies were stunned, opponents were quietly grinning, and Leavitt, she was moments away from erupting. Because once the truth is out, you can't put it back in the box.
The confrontation unfolded in a packed congressional hearing room, a place where political theater is as common as coffee cups and camera flashes. Rows of reporters lined the back wall, their fingers hovering over keyboards, ready to catch the next headline-worthy soundbite. Television crews had already secured prime angles, knowing this session between Karoline Leavitt and Jasmine Crockett was destined for fireworks. Leavitt, the polished and ambitious Republican figure, sat at the forefront, her signature controlled smile fixed in place. Across from her, Representative Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp wit and fearless cross-examination style, flipped through a folder thick with notes and highlighted tabs. The tension was visible, like two sprinters at the starting line, each waiting for the gun to go off. The topic on the table was supposedly about transparency in public service, but anyone who had followed these two knew there was more boiling beneath the surface. Months of political jabs, social media digs, and whispered rumors had been building to this very moment. As aides shuffled papers and cameras zoomed in, you could almost feel the undercurrent. This wasn't just about policy. This was about credibility, personal image, and a test of composure under fire. And with the nation watching live, every glance, pause, and raised eyebrow mattered. What no one realized yet, except perhaps Jasmine Crockett herself, was that she had come prepared to pivot the conversation into territory Karoline Leavitt never wanted to tread.
The hearing began, as expected, with routine statements and policy jargon, but it didn't take long for the undercurrent of personal animosity to surface. Karoline Leavitt leaned forward into her microphone, her tone steady but unmistakably pointed. "Representative Crockett," she began, "the American people expect transparency from their leaders, not just in their professional dealings, but in how they conduct themselves personally." It was a loaded opener. On paper, it was about ethics in office, but her gaze, her cadence, and the barely disguised smirk hinted at something more. She was circling a personal target. The room shifted. Reporters perked up. Crockett, unbothered, flipped to a new page in her notes, but didn't look away. Leavitt pressed on. When public servants hide aspects of their personal lives or mislead the public, it raises questions about what else they might be concealing. She didn't mention marriage directly, but everyone in the chamber could sense the insinuation. This wasn't just political sparring. This was personal. And in Washington, personal attacks often make the loudest headlines. Whispers rippled through the back row as Leavitt tightened her grip on the narrative. "It's about accountability," she continued. "And if someone's own household is built on misrepresentation, how can they claim to represent the truth for their constituents?" Gasps were audible now. Crockett kept her expression measured, but her eyes were locked on Leavitt, reading every word, every gesture. For the audience, the question was immediate. Would Crockett brush off the jab, or would she fire back?
Karoline Leavitt had just finished her thinly veiled accusation when a brief pause filled the chamber. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine Crockett, waiting for her to respond. But instead of jumping in immediately, Crockett leaned back in her chair as if weighing her words. Then, without breaking eye contact, she slid a single sheet from her folder and placed it on the desk in front of her microphone. The room went still. "Ms. Leavitt," Crockett began, her tone calm but with an edge that cut through the hum of the crowd. "It's interesting you bring up the topic of transparency and misrepresentation in one's personal life, because I've been doing my homework." A low murmur swept across the back of the room. The audience wasn't expecting this turn. Crockett continued, flipping to a second document. "Before we discuss my marriage, perhaps we should clarify yours, or more accurately, the narrative surrounding it." Leavitt's confident smile faltered just enough for the cameras to catch it. Crockett's voice sharpened. "You've stood on this very platform, time and again, championing family values, yet public records and your own words tell a very different story. Isn't it true that in the months leading up to your campaign, you omitted key facts about your marital history that voters had a right to know?" Gasps. Reporters' fingers flew over keyboards. Leavitt shifted in her seat, visibly unsettled. "That's irrelevant to—" "No, ma'am," Crockett cut in, her tone decisive. "When you question my integrity, you open the door to a conversation about yours, and I'm more than happy to have that conversation." The shift was palpable. This was no longer Leavitt's offensive. Crockett had seized control of the narrative. The energy in the room pivoted. Where moments before Leavitt had the upper hand, now eyes turned toward her with fresh scrutiny. By drawing attention to documented inconsistencies in Leavitt's own past, Crockett had not only neutralized the attack, but also placed her opponent on defense. From that moment, everyone in the room and the millions watching knew the gloves were off.
Jasmine Crockett didn't waste the moment. With the room's attention locked on her, she slid a small stack of documents toward the center of her desk, each page marked with color-coded tabs. "Let's address your insinuations about my marriage," Crockett said evenly, her eyes never leaving Leavitt. "You suggested there's something hidden, something dishonest. Here's the truth, and I'll state it under oath." She tapped the first sheet. "My marriage license? Publicly filed. My spouse's professional record? Untarnished. Our joint financial disclosures, cleared by the Ethics Committee without a single revision." A few audience members nodded subtly, sensing the shift in momentum. Then, Crockett leaned closer to the microphone, her voice steady but charged with conviction. "For over a decade, I've served my community in public office. I've fought for veterans' benefits, authored bipartisan legislation to protect small businesses, and yes, balanced that with being a wife. I've never hidden who I am or where I come from." She flipped to another tabbed page. "Meanwhile, Ms. Leavitt, your own campaign filings omitted key information about your spouse's business dealings until the press uncovered them. That's not my opinion. That's documented fact, reported on August 12, 2023 by the Concord Ledger." Gasps rippled through the chamber again. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight of evidence spoke for itself. "You came here today hoping to paint me as secretive, but what you've done is reveal your own selective transparency. And unlike you, I won't hide behind vague statements or deflections." She ended with a personal note, her tone softened just enough to pierce through the political noise. "My marriage, like my public service, isn't perfect, but it's honest, built on mutual respect and the kind of commitment you can't fake for a campaign ad." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with recognition. Crockett had done more than defend herself. She had dismantled the attack fact by fact, while planting seeds of doubt about Leavitt's credibility. By the time she pushed her notes aside, the battle lines had shifted permanently. This was now Crockett's arena. Karoline Leavitt shifted in her chair, the composure she had worn like armor beginning to crack. She reached for the microphone, her voice carrying a hint of strain masked by forced confidence. "Well," she began, flipping through her own notes with more speed than precision, "it's interesting to hear Representative Crockett frame this as some sort of grand revelation, but I think the American people deserve to hear the full story." She paused, her eyes darting toward the cameras before returning to Crockett. "This isn't personal. It's about transparency and leadership. I've always said that public officials should be held to the highest standards. If Representative Crockett believes her marriage and her record are beyond reproach, then fine. But I have every right to raise questions when the facts appear murky." Her words hung in the air, but they lacked the sting they might have carried earlier. The audience had already seen the documents. They'd heard the direct counterpoints. Leavitt's tone grew sharper as she tried to reclaim the offensive. "Let's not pretend this is about me avoiding scrutiny. My campaign filings were corrected the moment discrepancies were flagged. That's called accountability. I've never shied away from answering questions." But a few reporters in the back exchanged knowing glances. Crockett's earlier point had already undercut that claim. Perhaps sensing the shift, Leavitt tried one last pivot. "What I won't stand for is a personal attack being dressed up as a policy discussion. We're here to serve the American people, not air our private lives as political theater." The problem was the room now felt like the theater she described, and she wasn't controlling the script anymore. A low murmur ran through the audience, a mix of skepticism and sympathy. Leavitt's words were defensive, her body language taut. Every time she tried to sound authoritative, it came off as reactive, as though she were responding to Crockett's framing rather than setting her own. By the time she finished, the contrast was stark. Crockett had stood calm and unflinching. Leavitt had looked rattled, her arguments looping back to self-justification. The energy in the chamber had shifted, and not in her favor. The moment the gavel dropped, signaling the close of the hearing, it was as if someone had pressed go on the internet. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm dismantling of Karoline Leavitt's accusations were already flooding Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. On Twitter, the hashtag #CrockettClapback started trending within an hour. Edits paired her key lines with dramatic reaction gifs, while political commentators clipped the marriage revelation moment and labeled it the turning point. One viral post read, "Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in staying cool under fire, and Karoline never saw it coming." Over on TikTok, creators turned the exchange into memes, adding slow zooms on Leavitt's shifting expressions. Others paired Crockett's quotes with applause sound effects, replaying them in loops that racked up hundreds of thousands of views overnight. Mainstream outlets picked it up next. Morning news segments framed it as a rare case where personal jab backfired, noting that Crockett's revelations about her marriage weren't just personal. They tied directly into her credibility and years of advocacy. But the impact didn't stop at headlines. Constituents flooded Crockett's office with supportive calls and emails, some sharing their own stories of being underestimated or attacked in public settings. One woman wrote, "Watching you keep your composure reminded me not to shrink myself in meetings. You gave me courage." Meanwhile, Leavitt's team scrambled to do damage control, issuing statements that accused Crockett of political grandstanding. Yet the defensive tone only amplified the perception that she'd been caught off guard. Behind the scenes, strategists from both parties quietly acknowledged the reality. Crockett's moment wasn't just a win in that room. It was a branding victory. She had emerged as a voice capable of defending herself and her values without losing her cool, something voters remember long after the dust settles. By the week's end, Crockett's speech was being used in training clips for advocacy groups, cited as an example of controlled, fact-backed rebuttal. The ripples were clear.
In politics, the moment you flip the narrative in real time can define you far beyond the room where it happened.
Beyond the sharp exchanges and viral clips, there's a truth here that resonates far outside the walls of that congressional hearing. What Jasmine Crockett demonstrated wasn't just a well-timed rebuttal. It was the power of preparation, authenticity, and refusing to let someone else define your narrative. Too often, public figures, especially women, and particularly women of color, are subjected to attacks that aim to undermine not just their positions, but their very personhood. Crockett's choice to respond with facts, personal context, and calm conviction was more than a political strategy. It was a blueprint for anyone facing a public or private challenge. Stay grounded in your truth and let your record speak louder than someone's accusations. The responses pouring in from young professionals in boardrooms, activists in community halls, and even parents teaching their kids about resilience showed that this moment mattered. People saw themselves in Crockett's composure. They felt the sting of being misrepresented, and they felt the satisfaction of watching someone turn that moment into a statement of strength. There's also a broader reminder here about advocacy. Having someone in your corner who knows your work, who can articulate your value when you're under attack, can change the trajectory of a conversation and even a career. Crockett's intervention for herself wasn't just self-defense. It was an example of why we need to be that advocate for others when we can. And the lasting significance? Long after the trending hashtags fade, the clip of Crockett holding her ground will live on as a reference point. A how-to in standing tall when someone tries to cut you down. Because sometimes the most important victory isn't just winning the argument. It's walking away knowing you didn't let them shake who you are.
So, what did we just witness? Not just a heated exchange, not just political drama, but a masterclass in defending your truth when it matters most. Jasmine Crockett didn't just answer accusations. She turned the narrative on its head and reminded everyone watching that preparation, confidence, and authenticity are more powerful than any smear. Now here's the challenge for you. When someone tries to rewrite your story, whether it's in the workplace, in your personal life, or online, will you let them? Or will you take a page from Crockett's playbook and stand firm, armed with your facts, your work, and your worth? If this story lit a fire in you, share it. Send it to a friend who needs that reminder. Post it to your feed so more people see what standing your ground really looks like. And if you want more moments like this, the truth, the drama, and the lessons that stick with you long after the headlines fade, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Headline Hoax right now and hit the bell, because the next big story is already unfolding, and you won't want to miss the moment it turns. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Don't let anyone else write it for you.